This program is brought to you in part by the Eugenie and Joseph Jones Family Foundation, a local foundation proud to support education, the arts, and culture in the greater New Orleans area. Informed Sources is made possible in part by Susie and Pierre G. Villery.
We want to know more, do you? Informed Sources brings our region's top print and broadcast journalists together
to examine the stories behind the headlines.
And we can all learn more.
Hello, I'm Marcia Kavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, the state execution raised some of the old questions about the appropriateness of capital punishment and new questions about the method. We heard both debates this week in which there was a return to death row. In politics, the number of potential major candidates in the upcoming New Orleans mayoral election increased by one, and there are 4 proposed state constitutional amendments awaiting voters next week. We'll look at these stories as well as a controversy over damaging ankle monitoring bracelets, as well as why Louisiana's ranking in allergy susceptibility is nothing to sneeze at. Joining us are tonight's Informed Sources, Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources, Don Ostrom, Channel 12's Future Watch reporter, Robert Collins, professor at Dillard University and political analyst for Fox 8 and Verite News, and Mike Perlstein, investigative reporter, WWL Louisiana, Channel 4. And we're going to stick with Mike because for the first time in 15 years, there was an execution in the state of Louisiana. A man was put to death for his crimes. You were there.
I was, and I was in the media room with a cluster of other print and broadcast reporters. There were also 2 media representatives who were witnesses who were actually in, the death room. Those were John Zimmerman of Times-Picayune Advocate, as well as Gina Swanson from WDSU. That is a tradition back when executions were more common. That ended in 2010, so it had been a 15-year pause for a variety of reasons. The execution method then was lethal injection. The drug cocktail, some of those components were increasingly hard to get a hold of, in fact impossible. And then there was a change, I guess of heart in the administration to put a pause on executions until Governor Jeff Landry, Attorney General Liz Muriel, as something they campaigned on, eager to restart executions. In order to do that, the lethal injection method still had the same impediments, so the legislature passed this new method of execution, which they're calling nitrogen hypoxia. Basically, it's suffocation by pumping pure nitrogen through a mask into the condemned prisoner. And that is what happened Tuesday. The procedure began at about 6:20, and he was pronounced dead at 6:50 p.m.
And of course, this was Jesse Hoffman was his name.
That's right.
And for the murder of Molly Elliott, marketing executive, in 1966, 1996 rather, 97?
Yeah, 96.
And 96 when it occurred.
And for the most part, all of the crimes committed by the people on death row could be considered, heinous. There's certainly a matter of, judgment call, arbitrariness, what parish, some crime that might occur in Orleans would not even, be brought up for capital, punishment, whereas St. Tammany or Jefferson, the same crime maybe would, or even a lesser version. Mm-hmm. This was, certainly a terrible crime committed when Jesse Hoffman Jr. was 18. His victim, Molly Elliott, was 28, advertising executive, was leaving work. I think Hoffman was a parking attendant, and he was convicted of basically kidnapping her in her car, taking her to withdraw money, then drive to St. Tammany, where he raped and then murdered her, shooting her in the head, sort of execution style as it's been described. Now that was, almost 30 years ago, and the supporters of Jesse Hoffman, say he was a completely changed man, converted to Buddhism, and one of the big last-minute appeals was that this method of execution, they tried to appeal on the grounds that it's cruel and unusual punishment, basically suffocation by gas. And the other, which was interesting and novel certainly, was that as a practicing Buddhist, that Jesse Hoffman would have been unable to practice a ritual of, mindful breathing in these, very solemn final moments of his life. All of those appeals failed, both at state and federal level. And what that does is, this being the first time that method has been used in Louisiana, it's going to eliminate that now that there is precedent here in the state, through at least the state court system all the way up to the Louisiana Supreme Court, for future death row inmates when their time is up and they get a scheduled execution date. It kind of takes that off of the table as an appeal.
How many more remain on death row?
Okay, well, interestingly, there were 57 when they kind of restarted the machinery of executions in the state. One of the men who had been scheduled, actually the day before, on March 17th, he died. He was an 81-year-old man, Christopher Sepulveda, and he died of natural causes. He was old, very infirm, had a leg amputated, was in hospice, so he died before his execution date, and that left Jesse Hoffman as that first test case, and it did run through all the appeals, including the United States Supreme Court, denied 5-4, and he was put to his death. Again, even among the supporters and obviously the administration resuming executions, it's a solemn procedure. It's very somber. There's always protesters right outside the gate of Angola, pretty large contingent of them on Tuesday protesting some Buddhist chants. A family member, sister of Jesse Hoffman, who had visited him earlier in the day, joined that group. So it's not without, controversy. What is likely to happen with the remaining 55 inmates, that's Louisiana death row at Angola. There is a single female on death row, Antoinette Frank, at the women's prison. Her case is not nearly far enough along on appeals, but the 55, we did hear from Liz Murrell after Tuesday's execution that they are going to proceed expeditiously with whatever motions and appeals need to be addressed so that some of those other cases can get execution dates.
So we can expect to see this repeated.
Well, like I said, this new method, which had been used 4 times previously in Alabama, now it's been used here in Louisiana. That seems to be a legal green light to proceed in other cases.
All right. All righty, Mike. It is somber, no doubt about that. All right, thanks. Robert, let's go on over to you, because there was an addition now to the race for the mayor of New Orleans announced officially this week.
Yes, so now we have 3 officially announced candidates for the mayor's race. Councilperson at large, Helena Moreno. We have a retired Orleans Parish Criminal District Court Judge, Arthur Hunter. And this week, current councilperson Oliver Thomas jumped into the race. And so now we have 3 officially announced candidates. We have some candidates that said they're going to announce, like former 911 director Terrell Morris says he's going to run, but he hasn't filed any paperwork with campaign finance yet, so he's not official yet. So we have 3 officially announced candidates yet. Now, of course, Oliver Thomas is not new to the people of New Orleans. He's well known. He was actually first elected in 1994 to Council District B. He started his career as a foot soldier for the Bold political organization, Uptown. Became a legislative assistant to former councilperson Jim Singleton. And then when Councilperson Singleton was elected at large, then Oliver Thomas took over his council seat, was elected to his council seat, District B, served 2 terms in District B, and then from there went on to be elected councilperson at large, served served a term and a little bit of part of a second term councilperson at large. At the time, he was considered a mayor in waiting. He was sort of considered a favorite to be mayor at the end of his 4-year term as councilperson. He was going to run again, but then he was derailed in 2007. He was indicted and pled guilty to a federal bribery charge, basically accepting $15,000 as a kickback for a contract. And so because of that, he had to resign his position. He actually served 2 years in federal prison, and then he came back home after serving his time. He got involved in the community again. He became a talk show host on WBOK radio. He's still a talk show host on WBOK radio. And then in 2021, he made his comeback by defeating Councilperson Cindy Wynn in Council District E, which is New Orleans East. And so he sort of, he promotes himself as a redemption story. So yes, I made some mistakes. I served my time. I came back. I was active in the community. I was reelected, and so now I'm going to continue my redemption story by becoming mayor.
He's had 3 council seats. He started off in Council B, then at large, and now which is very interesting because both his original organization really never had a stranglehold. They really never had a foothold, and so it's sort of interesting that he's from Uptown. His political start in Uptown, but then his political comeback is in District E in the East, where he really just moved to just a few years before running for that seat.
Robert, let me ask you this, just sort of briefly, if you could. What does this do now to the race, having Oliver in it?
Well, it certainly makes it, more interesting. It makes it a little more robust because, truth be told, Helena was probably going to run away with it if another member of the council or another elected official did not get into the race. So, Moreno has about $1 million in the bank right now. She is the prohibitive favorite. She is also running ahead in all of the polling that's been done. Oliver Thomas has about $200,000 in the bank right now. Arthur Hunter has a negligible amount in the bank, but he would argue he just started his campaign. He hasn't started raising money yet. So the challenge is going to be, can Oliver raise enough money to be competitive with Moreno? It's going to be tough because basically she's been running for mayor for 4 years and she has done a very effective job of going around and getting commitments from all of the financial people in the city. And so when another candidate thought about running for mayor and went and talked to these people, they were like, oh, I wish you had talked to me 6 months ago. Helena already talked to me and we made a commitment, so we have to stay in with her. So Oliver's going to have to come up with a very good strategy to break off some of Moreno's support. It's going to be challenging. Now, it's an open race. Anything could happen. We don't know what's going to happen, but she remains the prohibitive favorite.
And he certainly has name recognition.
Sure.
What about Arthur Hunter? There's Arthur Hunter, who's been a judge, come from NOPD as an officer, and he's kept politically active, ran a successful race in the past. Is he to be considered a major candidate or just a spoiler?
Well, he's respected, but the problem is I don't know where his money's going to come from. You have to have a financial base. Criminal district judges generally don't have as big a financial base as council members who vote on city contracts and things of this nature. Well, so I don't know. So Arthur's going to have a challenge raising money.
And we will see, because we certainly, if you can get it in real quick, we've got to move on.
Okay, I'm moving.
Okay, because we're going to be talking about this a lot in the weeks to come. All right, thanks a lot, Robert. Don, let's go over to you, because we've got allergies here.
Well, we usually like having high places on nationwide lists. It's usually good news. This week it was not good news when the Allergy and Asthma Foundation of America declared that we are number 2 in the nation worst for allergy sufferers, winning only to Wichita, Kansas. And they measured all sorts of things. How many people use prescription medication and over-the-counter medication, what our pollen counts are, and that sort of thing. I talked with an allergy and immunology expert, Dr. Kambaj at LSU Health Sciences Center, and he was a wealth of information. One of the most interesting things I learned from him is that pollen counts have a timer on them not just seasonal, but daily, and that it is the worst right after sunrise. So if you are a sufferer, which before the show we decided we all are, if you are a sufferer, you don't want to be out in the morning hours, and you really don't want to be out until at least noon in the spring and summer. That's when we're currently suffering from tree pollen mostly, and grasses are starting to come up. In the fall, it's the ragweed pollens. Those stay active from sunrise until 3 in the afternoon. So you really have some peak. If you're an exerciser outdoors, if you're walking a dog, doing yard work, you really want to do it in the later afternoon or the evening. And then he reminded me you don't want to do it too late in the evening in the summertime, because then you're dealing with mosquitoes instead. So you have a very small window of time. Only about 25% of people nationwide are allergy sufferers. Here in South Louisiana, there are more, apparently. And that may be because our allergy season is getting longer and our pollen counts are getting higher. And that is due in large part to 2 things. One, higher temperatures that we're seeing regularly, and more storms. And not just hurricanes and tropical storms, but thunderstorms also bring in pollens from elsewhere. And tonight we're dealing with a different kind of storm coming in after this cold front, a dust storm coming in from Texas and New Mexico that's bringing in different kinds of pollens to this region. Allergy risks for all of us. If you're born in pollen season, you're more at risk to suffer from other viruses and problems. You could develop asthma later in life. It also affects all of our quality of life. It's annoying. Other people tend to think when they hear you coughing or sneezing or nasally, they think you might be contagious. And allergies are not contagious, except for when they fall into other things like bronchitis and sinus infections that cause other problems. But there are new therapies. Like if you're a kid who grew up, like we talked about before the show, going and getting shots twice a week and then once a week and then every 2 weeks, there are pills for that now, where you have to, in clinic, go for the very first pill to make sure you don't have a bad reaction, but then you can take a weekly pill for grass pollens, for ragweed pollens, for dust and dust mite pollens.
And then you mentioned also to us before we started taping about nasal spray at bedtime.
Yes, prevention is key. Saline spray or an ocean spray in your nose, not tap water in your nose because you're introducing other bacteria, but just to clear it out, because those pollen particles will last in your nose forever, and then you're just breathing them in all night long. So before you go to bed, clean it out. Also, he said, live like a rock star if you can, meaning go out covered up. Sunglasses to keep the pollens out of your eyes, a hat to keep it off your hair so you're not bringing it into your house, scarf, keep it off your body, and
yeah, we all should
and
look
a HEPA
like Mick
filter.
Jagger then. Okay,
Yes, a HEPA
right,
filter
exactly.
in your house will help.
And the yellow stuff that covers everything, that's what? Oak
That
pollen?
is tree pollen.
Okay. All righty. Good tips there. Thanks a lot, Dawn. All right, E, over to you, because we have some decisions to make about constitutional amendments coming up.
Yeah, we are currently living under the Constitution that was approved in 1974. The session has started in 73 to approve it, and then it was finally approved in 74. And one problem they had with it, there have been many constitutions in the state's history, but the one that preceded this, and the problem was that it was just so tight legally that everything had to be a constitutional amendment. And there were so many constitutional amendments that voters were just saying hell no, and they were voting so nothing could happen. Okay, they weren't able to pass. So they said we need a more modern constitution that allows more flexibility. So this constitution was passed in 74. It didn't exactly totally get rid of the problem, because since then there have been 324 amendments. But however, of those, 221 have been approved, so at least they're approving, so at least a little bit more than half of them have been approved, and so there's something to work with. This was Edwin Edwards' finest hour, by the way. The state was bogged down. He was a new young governor. He got that passed. Other governors have tried. But coming up, actually, next Saturday, there are 4 amendments. They were all put on the ballot in November by the legislature. Of those 4, the major one is number 2, which we'll talk about in a second. But of all amendments to the Constitution, most of them deal with revenue matters. Excuse me. And number 2 does that. But the other ones, first of all, number 1, there are a lot, we don't hear much about this, but there are a lot of little specialty courts that start up to deal with issues like business issues or financial issues. And so this kind of loosens the procedures for specialty courts. Also, there's problems about the legislature having the jurisdiction of out-of-town lawyers. They had this thing with the insurance thing, where this Houston law firm got involved, and the Supreme Court couldn't do anything about it. And so it's cleaning that up. Number 3 is the about the prosecution of juveniles as adults. There's a list of about 16 crimes that a juvenile can be prosecuted as an adult, and they want to expand the list significantly, and so that would allow that. Mike, do you hear anything about that in your world, about people when?
Well, it's the continuation of a trend we're seeing, and it's actually a reversal of a previous trend to, I guess, be more rehabilitative with juveniles rather than punitive. Well, that's been rolled back first with, the repeal of raise the age so that 18-year-olds, before, were considered the age of adult prosecution. That dropped down to 17, and now the same advocates for stiffer punishment for juveniles are adding to an already, pretty substantial list of crimes that can take juveniles, which would be 16 and under, to adult court to be prosecuted as adults.
For certain crimes, and this would allow the legislature to determine what those crimes would be, correct?
Yeah.
For this amendment. Okay, we got to move along real quick.
Okay, well, number 4 has to do with the calendar for elected judges. Not a really controversial thing. The big one is number 2. This is a budget overhaul thing. This is what the governor's been going around the state campaigning for this. Robert, I know you've been looking at it. This is really the major one.
And I think the challenge the governor is going to have is that this is really 4 amendments in one. It's so complex and it does so many things that I think a lot of voters are not going to, it does propose to raise pay for teachers. It changes the highest tax bracket.
With a lot of moving parts.
It's so confusing that I think a lot of voters are just going to vote against it because they're not going to understand.
It doubles the standard deduction, which a lot of people would like. But the bill itself, the amendment itself, is 115 pages, right? And it is described on the ballot in 91 words. And so as a voter, that's why you got to go ahead. We get a lot of this information. The key source of information is the Public Affairs Research Council. And I advise everybody to look at their website where they do a good job of explaining these things.
Yes, because that amendment number 2 is really complex. It touches on so many things. All right, good. Let's wrap up with you, Mike, because you've been following ankle bracelet monitoring and lack thereof and the consequences of it.
Well, any reporters, especially here locally in the metro area, have now been dealing with stories of electronic monitoring with ankle bracelets because there's been an explosion in the use of them, not just for people who are out on bail as an extra measure of protection, but in domestic violence, allegations, even with, victim protection, perimeter, victim fob, sometimes as a condition of probation. So we're seeing the use of this a lot more, and not just in New Orleans, but surrounding parishes. And a story that I did this week and last week involved a woman out of Jefferson Parish who was out on a large bail, $650,000, for a manslaughter charge on an ankle bracelet. Obviously, the bail bond company very keenly interested in, keeping tabs on her, and she showed up at University Medical Center saying she needed a medical procedure, an MRI, which you can't do with an ankle bracelet. So they called over the ankle bracelet company to take it off. And the company agent saw that things just weren't adding up. I mean, there was a doctor in the room with her, but she was supposedly wheeled in on symptoms of a stroke, but she's walking and talking, smoking a cigarette. So she alerted the bail agent. And the bail agent happened to go by the hospital, and sure enough, she's leaving with the doctor. Big red flag alert. The ankle bracelet, company came to put the bracelet back on. And she said, we're going to do it tomorrow. And the next morning, when that was supposed to occur, sure enough, there was an alert of a, tamper on the bracelet miles and miles away in the 9th Ward. The, ankle monitor company alerts the bail agent, and there they find the woman in the backseat of a car getting this thing hacked off by the doctor, allegedly, who happens to be her brother. And sure enough, that doctor who was with her at the hospital was her brother, Dr. Carrie Sterling, who has a clinic here in New Orleans and travels around the state. And she gets arrested immediately on the spot. He drives off. Jefferson Parish puts out a warrant for his arrest. They catch up with him finally in Madison Parish and Tallulah, out of hospital working, and take him into custody right there on the spot. He's a week in that lockup in Madison Parish and was just brought, very, very late last night to Jefferson Parish, where he's now awaiting, pretty serious charges. And these are some new developments with the increase of the ankle monitoring. So taking the device off yourself is a violation. And now anyone who helps that person can be convicted as well of tampering with an electronic monitoring device. So he is been booked with that, as well as accessory after the fact to manslaughter, which is the original charge on his sister.
And then his sister now, is she in custody?
Correct. So she gets a whole new set of charges by virtue of this escape attempt, trying to take the bracelet off. She was a no-show in court just before that. So she has a new bail set of $700,000, which we'll see what the bail is set on, her brother, the doctor. But in the end, this, what was called a kind of a attempt at a slick scheme to pose as her doctor and get this
major
thing
consequences.
off, did not turn out well for them. She's locked up on a super high bail. And, in addition to him facing criminal charges, he's clearly put his medical license and career in some serious jeopardy.
So bottom line, don't mess with the ankle bracelet if you happen to have
And
one.
this is just one of so many stories that we've been seeing and doing. Crimes committed by people on ankle bracelets, people with violations of their ankle bracelets getting it taken off and then popping up in other crimes. So there's just a lot going on.
Just leave it alone. Okay, all right. Thanks, Mike. Guys, real quick for Around the Table.
April 14th, new session of the legislature. The regular session starts at noon, April 14th. It has to close June 12th by 6 p.m.
We go at it again. Okay, thanks. Dawn.
March 29th, crazy day when the rescheduled St. Patrick's Day Parade is happening. Verite Fest is also happening on Verite between Napoleon and Valmont from 11 to 6. Loyola School of Music has stages sponsored and lots of students performing.
It's election day, too. Okay, Robert.
Yes.
2 days ago, the Mississippi legislature repealed all of their income tax. If the governor signs that into law, that means both Texas and Mississippi will have no income tax. It will put more pressure on the Louisiana legislature to repeal it again and throw our tax code up in the air once again.
All right. Mike.
Well, a national search well underway to find the replacement for Executive Director Ghassan Korban of the New Orleans Sewage and Water Board. He's leaving on May the 2nd. He obviously, having been 6.5 years in that post, hoping that he has an opportunity to brief whoever his successor is. But we'll see how fast that process goes in the hands of the Sewage and Water Board.
All right. Thanks a lot, guys, for being here. And thank you all for watching. We will see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.
Informed Sources is made possible in part by Susie and Pierre G. Villery.
From Masterpiece to Nova, Antiques Roadshow to Agatha Christie.
And of course, stepping out and Informed Sources.
We are pleased to support public television.
It's been our passion.
For a lifetime.
This program is brought to you in part by the Eugenie and Joseph Jones Family Foundation, a local foundation, proud to support education, the arts, and culture in the greater New Orleans area.